So again, welcome. Today we are talking through what is new in ARM, walking through all of the functions, features, changes we've made over the course of the last year, over the course of 2023. So really covering all of the ARM 2023 point something versions that came out. So we'll mostly be in PowerPoint, and then we'll kind of toggle back and forth into ARM to show a little bit the function or feature as we go through. All right, so first up is the new protocol wizard. And really what we did here was throw out the old way to create a protocol, which we found, especially when we were training new groups, was pretty confusing. It was some very technical questions about choosing a study definition, and wasn't really a great start, especially for someone new to the program to get started. So we threw out those old questions, and we put together a new dialogue that provides really two options for creating a protocol. And the first one is to utilize a protocol template, which is a brand new function we added along with this change. And then the second option is kind of the classic way to create a protocol, where you're starting completely empty. And typically the first step was to review the settings, the protocol settings, before you got into the protocol file. So we'll take a look at both of those choices here. This first option, as I said, kind of brand new, added to ARM at this time in 2023.0, and that was the concept of a protocol template. And really the goal here is to copy just certain information, not everything, but just the information that you want from a previous protocol. So maybe you did something very similar to the study that you're doing this year, did almost the same thing last year, very similar setup. A lot of times people would go and find last year's protocol file, maybe even entirely outside of ARM, and copy it, or open it up and use a save as to just make a complete duplicate of that previous protocol. And our goal here is to maybe optimize that workflow, and instead of making a complete copy, use that old protocol as a template to start in with next year's protocol. The key difference being you get to choose what information you're going to copy. So you don't have to review every single screen throughout that protocol to make sure that you update or remove information that no longer applies. Instead, you have a clean slate, brand new protocol, and you're choosing only sections that are the same, hopefully being a little more efficient, save a little bit of time. So that's the goal here. The protocol template itself isn't a special file. You don't have to do anything special to create a template. It really is just choosing an existing protocol file wherever that may be. And it's really using the same logic as the merge functionality, if you've ever used that in ARM. It's just, here's a list of all of the sections in a protocol. Do you want to copy the treatments? Do you want to copy the protocol description? Do you want to copy the assessment headers? You get to choose what gets brought over into a new file for this year. And certainly if you are in a company that has a set of protocol writers where that's all they do, you can take that a step further. And if you want to create protocols specifically with them being templates in mind, it's certainly possible to do that. So you can go even further if you really want to organize within your company. If you're making a lot of protocols and have a lot of trials going on, it might be worthwhile. All right, moving on to the second option, that protocol checklist. Again, this is kind of the classic way that's always been available in ARM, starting just with the totally empty protocol. And usually the first step is to look to the study settings. And what we found ourselves doing in training is going through each tab of the protocol settings and pointing out one or two options that are used the most or matter the most. And there's usually 10, 12, 20 different little options on each screen, but there are, really just a few that are most commonly used. So we actually brought those, we'll call them the most popular, most impactful options, brought those onto this checklist on this first screen. So that way you don't have to page through all those options, but it's just a quick list to show and recap what we have set to get started with our protocol. So it's interactive. It's trying to communicate if anything is missing or empty that's important. In my screenshot here, I have the plot dimension set to 0. So it's kind of highlighting that that's not possible necessarily. So that's maybe something I need to fill in. Anything that isn't strictly required, but maybe might be nice to use, something like rule sets or SEs that has the little warning symbol. And then actually each item in this checklist is actually interactive, and it'll take you right to the setting itself. So I'm going to go into ARM real quick just to show that. So if I create a new protocol, I see this wizard here. There's where I could create or load information from a template. Looking in the checklist here, you can see when I hover over something, it turns into a link. So if I want to adjust the treatment units, for example, I just need to click on that row and it'll open the protocol settings to the appropriate tab where that option is at. And so if I were wanting to change my treatment units over to the US standard for some reason, it makes it easy to do so. And now you'll see that checklist has refreshed to show me my selection. So again, just a little optimization, trying to make things just a little bit quicker, more efficient. Instead of having to page through every section, let's bring things that matter to the forefront. One more addition, kind of in this flow of making a new protocol, is in the protocol settings dialog. Only when you're in this new protocol flow, there is the ability now to insert study rule sets or load SE files. And that's just during this initial setup period before that protocol has been created in a sense. So some advantages, of course, instead of having to go to the rules editor and the SE definitions and do the loading process, it's just real fast here to choose the ones you want. It's also kind of handy because you can choose more than one at a time. So I'll go back to my ARM quick just to show that in action. If I go to click on SE, for example, you can see I've got those 2 new tabs. And so if I wanted to, maybe I'll just choose 3 SEs to load and go into my study rules. And maybe I want my baseline, and maybe this is an herbicide, whatever. I can select multiple of them. And now when I create my protocol, we can see in the SE definitions, for example, all 3 of those that I chose have been loaded for me already. Same thing with the study rules. I have these baseline rules, and I gotta scroll down. Also have rules from that herbicide trials set. So just some automation steps, if you will, for speeding things up. And if you ever use the settings set functionality, you can now incorporate these selections, the rules, and the SEs in the settings set as well, if you wish. All right, moving on. Probably the biggest area for changes and development time, kind of however you want to summarize it. A lot of changes were landing here in the assessment editor. And I would say the number one change here, which anyone using ARM throughout the season probably noticed this one. It was quite the change in the assessment header. So that top half where we have the description for the assessments being performed, we wanted to reorganize those fields. We were finding over the years, we continue to add more fields to that header, and it was just becoming kind of harder and harder to find things. And one example for the crop, at the top of the header, you would define the crop, you would choose your code, it would fill in the scientific name, common name, but then when you would go to fill in the the crop stage or the density or the height, that's in a totally different section of the header. And so things being disjointed, we really just wanted to reorganize, have another go at making that header a little easier to use, a little more logical. So we found really different groups is how we ended up organizing things. Let's put all of the fields related to the crop in one spot, everything related to the pest in one spot. There's a bunch of fields that are intervals related to the timing of the assessment. And so we just found these logical groups as a way to organize the header. And so after doing that, we realized, wait a minute, we have these groups. How about we make the interface more dynamic? And so we added the ability to collapse or expand that group. So still have the regular view ability where you can choose which rows are hidden or visible for you. But now there's just one more layer available to also expand or collapse a group of information. And so within each group, we've chosen kind of the primary field from that. So for example, for your pest, the pest code kind of best encapsulates everything about the pest. So when you collapse that group, ARM still has a spot to display something. And so that one field, in this case, that pest code, is what's showing on the screen. So a nice shorthand, you can still see what is designated for the pest in that column, but now you've saved a lot of screen space by reducing that down just to one row. So if you're reviewing data, just wanting to take a look at what's been entered, it's a great way to simplify and focus in on what you really want to see or what you're trying to do. There's buttons in the corner to expand and collapse all of those groups. And if you work with view files, they can now remember which groups have been expanded or collapsed when you save those files. So if you kind of like that grouping capability, you always like to, for a certain function, you like to have things collapsed, just save or resave your view to incorporate that information, if you will, of what's expanded and what's shrunken down. Another change here in the assessment editor, I guess to preface this first part here, all of these pieces of information, they've been in ARM as an option for some time, really having additional details about a particular assessment. There's the spot for a comment, barcode, GPS, can attach a picture. All these pieces of information apply to, potentially apply to each and every data point, whether it's plot or even subsample value as you're recording data. What we added is a way to better visualize and see when some of that information is included in a trial. So we have icons that appear automatically on the screen when a particular plot has a GPS coordinate attached, or an image attachment, or a barcode has been filled in. So you can see the camera or the little pin icon or a barcode to show that there is additional information associated with that assessment value. The text comment that it can be added, that will display as the tooltip. So if you hover over an assessment value, the tooltip itself is whatever was entered in that comment. And then, as always, the marker to exclude the data point, that is a strike through. And that had been that way previously as well. Speaking of that marker, previously we had called it damaged. And especially when we were doing trainings on data review, kind of one of the first questions after talking about throwing out data points was, well, what happens if my plot isn't damaged, but I want to throw out the point? And so we realized the naming of that checkbox was maybe too specific, because you might have other reasons that that data point shouldn't be analyzed. It doesn't have to only be because of some physical damage. So we just wanted to generalize the terminology. The functionality itself remains the same, where it's going to, during the analysis, it'll treat that data point as if it's a missing data point, while you still can record everything about that assessment, even if you don't want it to be in the analysis itself. So just a little optimization here, maybe make it a little more intuitive and desirable to use, if you will, being called exclude instead. We'll see how many years it takes me to stop calling it damaged. I've got the muscle memory on that one. Trying to buck that trend. All right, this next one, this is a new field that we added into the header, and it's called data reliability. And so the field itself, the goal of it is, in the most basic level, it's a way to mark and signify that someone has reviewed and confirmed the data that's in that column. And so kind of originally, we really just wanted a simple yes or no. And the designation to be that whether or not this assessment should be used to draw conclusions. Just yes or no. Is it valuable or not? In some cases here, I've got a column of all zeros. Maybe we're looking at pest pressure. We just haven't had enough pest pressure yet. It's very early on in the season and the pest hasn't arrived. So there is no presence at all. It's a bunch of zeros. Or maybe if it's efficacy, it's all 100. Everything's been controlled because there wasn't anything to do. In that case, it's not that the data is wrong. It's not that the data is inaccurate. It's just that you can't learn anything by analyzing this assessment. It's just too early. So you can mark that as exclude. That would get a 1 because it's not, you're not going to learn anything. You really can't draw any conclusions yet. Whereas now, once you have pressure, once something is actually happening, now this is useful. So that's the goal of the kind of the yes or no. But we did have another idea then, and that's why we have a third option for best. And that's maybe taking a step back to the entire trial. Maybe there is a repeated assessment, again, with the efficacy or your stand count of how many weeds are out there, whatever. Looking at all of the ones that were taken during the trial, which one is the best? In that, which one, if you can only choose to look at one for your summary, this is the best one to use. This one explains, this demonstrates, what occurred in the trial. It shows the best separation between which treatments were the most effective and which weren't, or whatever the objective is. If you can only choose one column out of this trial, this one's the best. And so that's this third designation with the star. So we really ended up with three different values to help explain, again, not so much how well did I take the data, but more about the conclusions that you may draw from the data. And just by filling this in, our hope is that it's a way to show that someone, after typing in the data or pasting in the data or however it was recorded, someone has looked over it and made sure it's accurate and correct. And so just having a value there is one of the goals of the field. And so to that end, we didn't want it to be laborious at all. We didn't want anyone to have a reason to not utilize this field. And so you can see here in this little video that in addition to just having the field in the header where you can choose 1, 2, or 3, we also attached little icons for each one of those values to make it very easy to apply. So just hovering over the column heading, you can see those 3 icons, and just choosing one sets the value up in the header. Even if you don't have that data reliability field visible, it will set that value. To make it just real easy as you're going through confirming that the data is correct, as you're looking at it, you can just hit the check mark, or yeah, but that's all zeros, so I'll do the little X, whatever that designation is. Make it really easy, really fast to mark that down. And the other perk, kind of the reason why there is a number there, is it can be useful in ST, summary across trials. So now you can utilize that data reliability for when you want to create a summary. I only want to summarize columns that are 2 or 3, or maybe I only want 3s or whatever. It'll be useful as well because it is in ST. All right, next one, just kind of a real quick one to show as related to the collapsible panels. When you collapse a lot of groups, it is possible to end up with some blank space. Here I shrink down the crop and the pest, and suddenly there's empty space there. And it's just if you want to shrink that header portion to kind of auto size after making your changes to your grouping, just double clicking on that separator ARM will just automatically bring that up. It's just a little jarring, we found, if ARM automatically does that, especially if you're collapsing but then expanding another group. It was really jarring for ARM to do it automatically. So this is just kind of a slick way by double clicking that separator when you want to auto size. One more in the assessment header, you'll find the pest stage scale. So we've already had this for the crop, where you can designate what the stage scale will be for the, the stage majority, min max that you're filling in. but we didn't have it for the pest, and it was always defaulting to the BBCH. And so this gives a little more flexibility if you're using a descriptive scale, for example, that you can now use that in the assessment header. And if that stage scale is set in the header, that then will control the list for when you're putting in your pest stage information. Last but not least, in this section, disease severity calculation. In ARM, we had a Townsend-Huberger calculation, but we only had it for scales 0 to 4 and 0 to 10. And so we just wanted to add all the other combinations of different rating scales. So 0 to 3, 0 to 5, 0 to 6, added all of those different combinations to calculate that severity. So those are all in the action codes list now. All right, so the next function here is a statistical tool that we added in ARM called planned comparisons. Or if you're kind of statistically inclined, you may have heard them called contrasts. And the goal here, this functionality really is allowing for a custom analysis, if you will, because it allows you to choose and plan out specific comparisons of treatments in your study. So the math behind it, again, is called contrasts. There's these statistical tests on linear combinations of values from that comparison that you've chosen. So there's matrices, there's a whole lot of math behind the scenes. But I think there is a few pretty nice uses that can come from this function. Just off the top here, common situations, at least that we hear about. If you have a study where you want more than one check treatment, for example, within a replicate, just the way ARM is structured, you're forced to create a second treatment number to have a second check in a rep. The trouble is, then in the analysis, it's a little harder to pool those two together. It's not quite so straightforward because they really are the same thing. They're both the untreated, but it's not necessarily intuitive how to get those to combine again when you're doing comparisons. But here with this plan comparison, we'll show you how to combine those check treatments, or kind of same idea if you have standards as well. The same thing applies. You can also maybe avoid excluding some data because in general, you can focus in on just the treatments that you want to compare, but the statistical routine still includes all of the data that's been taken. And if you're working in multi-factor designs, you can kind of set up certain comparisons, different combinations as well that fit real nice with the idea of a factorial design as well. So in order to create a comparison in a study, we added a new statistics tab in the study settings, both the protocol and the trial. So there is a table of planned comparisons that is on that statistics tab, and you would just add a new row to that table for each comparison that you want to create. You can just type in the comparison text if you wish, but especially to get started, there is a wizard to kind of explain and provide a structure for which types of comparisons you can define. So clicking on that little pencil icon will bring up that wizard and show you those different types, which kind of guides you into the structure of that comparison itself. Then once you've defined the comparison, the output to actually run that test actually is just on the AOV means table report. So there's just a new option kind of at the bottom of the report settings where you can turn on to include the planned comparisons. So then on the AOV report, there's just kind of an inserted table right underneath your treatment means that gets added. And for each planned comparison that you've defined in the study, the description is printed there. So you can type in whatever description you want back in the settings there. Then there is a contrast value, which is the estimate. And then there's a test statistic. So those two are reported. And then finally, you get a p-value, which really ties back to your comparison hypothesis that you defined in the settings. And so the goal then there, when you look at that p-value, if it is significant, so if it is less than your alpha level, probably 5%, then you have the confidence to reject your null hypothesis. And so you could conclude that there is a significant difference between the treatments that you chose to compare. So real quick to just run through the types of comparisons. This is a brief overview. We do have a more in-depth presentation from our statistician. You can find it on our website there under user contrasts PDF that does have some math, does have some statistics in there, just to warn you, but it's a pretty nice presentation to just go a little deeper and understand how that all works. So, but here, just a quick rundown of the types of comparisons. You can compare to a constant. So you would just choose a treatment number and then give a value. So if you had a target where for some reason treatment 3, I wanted to know if the average of treatment 3 was significantly different than 100. You can define a constant comparison there. Maybe more useful, the paired comparison, that's a head-to-head. So you can do a head-to-head, just two different treatments. Are they the same? Are they different? So I can define treatment 4 versus treatment 5 if I wish. The averaged, you can combine more than one treatment together to be set up against one or more other treatments. So this would be that example with multiple checks I mentioned previously. I can pool together the different treatment numbers that really all are the same because they're the check, pool those together and then compare them to the product that I'm testing. And one perk, just to the way ARM is, ARM just asks you for the treatment numbers. You don't have to set up any equation or math to it. If you're doing this in like SAS, and there's an example in that PDF there, you can see if you're doing that in some other statistical packages, you usually have to come up with the full equation when you're averaging things together. So it's kind of nice. ARM makes it easy for us. And then finally, the fourth type of comparison is a pairwise. So that is comparing a set of treatments all against each other. 1 versus 2, 1 versus 3, 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, 2 versus 4, every combination, which is typically what we do with the AOV already. So if you want to kind of stress test the math, you could define a pairwise with every treatment in your study, and you'll find out in the end you get the exact same p-value as your treatment P of F. It becomes the same. But this is one where if you want to exclude the check, because that's maybe not the goal, is to find out whether our products are better than doing nothing. A lot of times you would throw out the check values, but now you're losing some statistical power because you're throwing it out. So if you instead do a pairwise comparison, just of treatments 2 through 7 and just leave out the check. The comparison is now focusing in on what you care about, but it's not losing statistical power. It's still using all of the data that you recorded in that assessment. So I think there's some power there to that capability. And then for any of those types of comparisons, you can add a logical and to combine multiple phrases, if you will, multiple comparisons into one single test. So here I'm comparing, a multi-factor example where maybe I've got 2 treatments that are the light, type, maybe kind of a light application rate, perhaps, and then the medium, and then the heavy. I can compare all 3 of those together by just adding another line for that comparison. So I think we'll leave it there in the interest of time, try and get through some of our other items, but definitely, hopefully something that could be of use. Definitely reach out to us if you have questions, not quite sure how to set that up. But again, in theory, that should be entered in a protocol. There's the statistics tab for your protocol as part of your planning of the experiment. And if you put it in there, all trials that you generate from that protocol will have those comparisons available and ready. But it is possible also to add a comparison to a trial. You don't have to get it into the protocol first. All right, one more kind of major feature, we'll call them our headliners, if you will, kind of falls under the category of protocol planning, and it's related to the trial location table. So in the protocol, this trial location table, the goal is to plan out all of the different trials that are going to be created from your protocol. So in this experiment, maybe I need, I have 10 different locations or 10 different trials at a variety of different locations that these are going to go out to. And this table is really great for planning that out. The one downside previously was if I'm a sponsor and I've planned out those 10 different locations, ideally I would send that protocol to each of my trialists. Then they can use that protocol to generate their specific trial. And they would just see this list of trials and they would click on their name, they would choose that trial to generate. The problem is the trialist then can see who else I'm working with. And so it can cause just a variety of practical troubles where trialist 4 says, oh, I didn't know you were working with trialist 2. Wait a minute, how come he gets 2 trial locations and you only gave me 1? You can about imagine the types of things that can come up from just having other the trialists see who all else is working with this experiment when there's just no reason for them to know that information. Just not necessary for everyone to know who all else is involved in this experiment. It's irrelevant. So we added a few new columns to this table with the goal of being able to limit who can see what rows in this table. So you can fill in either the GDM ID or the company ID, and those are both identifiers established for each ARM license. So it kind of comes from us at GDM. When you get a license, you get assigned as a person at a particular company. You get a GDM ID, and then multiple licenses in a single company. There's this overall company identifier as well. And so a protocol writer needs to fill in just one or the other. You don't have to have both, but as long as you have one of those values, then what ARM will do when someone else opens that protocol, ARM will look up the company ID of that person who's opening the protocol and will match with the company information linked here. So in my example here at the top, this is what the protocol author has filled in. There are 5 different people involved in this study, and you'll notice that 2 of them are with company 1. And then there's company 2, 3, and 4. If anyone from company 1 opens this protocol, ARM finds that company ID of 12 and only will display those 2 rows that are set to company 12. As a trialist in this company, I cannot see the other rows in this table that are assigned to someone outside my company. So again, that the goal is just to limit what others can see. There's no need for anyone else to know. You know, those trialists just need to see the trials planned for them, and that's all they need to see. But the author, the protocol owner, sees the full list. So if you want to make use of that functionality, you'll just want to obtain either or the GDM ID or the company ID from your contractors. We can't just give out the master list. That would be bad on several fronts. So you can simply request, and the process for them is very easy. In their ARM, they just need to go to the help menu and display their profile. And there's a list of their license information with a button that just says send license details. And it'll generate for them an email that just puts in all of their license information. And then they just have to send that to you, send that to the sponsor. And now the sponsor has the information for them to fill in when they're planning out their trials. So hopefully just a way to make this trial location table a little more valuable, eliminate kind of the one downside to doing that. Allow that all to be hidden. Okay, we've got a few more minutes left. I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit to get through these other items. This next function here is related to schedule tasks. So if you've used the task functionality in ARM before, it's a way to set up a calendar of different tasks to perform related to a trial. And there's a lot of nice functionality to set up that entire schedule. There's a calendar module in ARM to show you in a calendar format all of those tasks. And you can even send out that calendar to your Outlook. So that way, just even within Outlook, not just ARM, can you see what needs to be happening, what tasks need to be done. The one problem previously was that we were limited in how ARM could communicate with Outlook. It could only send to your default calendar, which would typically be your personal calendar. But oftentimes the desire was, well, I wish I could put this on a shared calendar. I could create a calendar that all of my field technicians have access to. So everyone in the office knows what needs to happen on what days. And so that's the new functionality here. We updated ARM to be able to communicate with any calendar that you have in your Outlook, assuming that within Outlook, you have the permissions to create items on that calendar. So just on the tasks editor, right where you would connect to your Outlook, there is a drop-down now to link to a particular Outlook calendar. And your options will look different from my options. ARM fills this box in based on what it finds when it talks to Outlook on your individual computer. So I had created a couple of calendars and named them in this fashion just to demonstrate that capability. We also added a way to unlink, kind of remove that linkage to Outlook. So if you, as a sponsor, receive a trial from a contractor who had connected to their Outlook, sometimes there was just a small delay when opening the file because ARM was trying to find that Outlook connection. So now there's a way to remove that connection. If the trial is all done, it would make sense. I don't really need that linkage anymore. Everything has been complete, so you can unlink just through a right click. And because we added that functionality, it opens up a workflow where if you wanted to send tasks to different calendars, you could just leverage that unlinking command to let you send tasks to different calendars if you wanted. And there's just showing, within Outlook, if you want to create a new calendar, you can do that within Outlook and then share that calendar with other individuals. And that'd be a way to kind of kickstart that goal of having this shared calendar where other people can see it and know what needs to be happening. All right, one other tweak, a little more generalized for editor views. There is a new automatic view that the ARM just figures out based on the trial you have open. And this will show you only fields that have a required or recommended study rule associated with them. So you can do this on the treatments editor, on the site description, and the assessment data editor. So if you had a reason you wanted to see only, on the screen, only see fields that have a rule associated with it, you just click on required recommended fields, and there you'll be able to see just those fields and hopefully probably make sure that they're all filled in. In the treatments editor, we just added a few new treatment types for a variety of different types of research. And just to kind of reiterate, the treatment type field itself, really the only purpose of it is for grouping products into separate lists. So each type that you see here corresponds to a separate list file for when you're creating treatments. So, ultimately the type itself isn't super important other than to make it easier to select your products because then they're grouped into those separate lists. A small update to validation. When you're performing the validation from tools validate study, we added the site description tab name or the section name in the message, just to make it easier to find. Oh, I need to fill in the latitude and longitude. That's on the general trial section of the site description. For the weather import, this is just an extra check before you launch the weather import command. ARM just real quickly checks your GPS coordinates to validate, to make sure they are within the GPS boundaries based on your country and your state or province that are entered in the trial. So the goal being, if you're using a weather function that reads your GPS coordinates in order to generate the weather, obviously you want to make sure those coordinates are accurate. So it's just a nice self-check. ARM wants to make sure those coordinates are accurate before bringing in data from an incorrect location. One more small statistical update, just adding a new mean comparison test called Scott-Knott. This was primarily a request from Brazil, as the registration authorities in Brazil required this analysis. So now that's available for reporting. And kind of our last section here is a group of entry field changes. And we did make quite a few changes to the definitions. And actually, a couple of them were brand new entire sections in the site description. And this first one is called greenhouse. So we're just finding more and more ARM is used in greenhouse studies. And one of the requirements is there's just a different set of environmental conditions to record. When you're in a greenhouse or a growth chamber, you've got a lot more control of the environment, and so you're looking more about recording the light intensity and the type of irrigation that you are putting in. That just slightly different set of details than you would on that we have in the weather section. So really, it's the equivalent. The weather tab is great for field trials. This is really for the greenhouse. It's the equivalent for that. So you would only ever fill out one or the other, depending on the location of how that trial was performed. It's all related to the environmental conditions, day in and day out. Essentially, that table just grows. So I see a question about the definition of a greenhouse, walking tunnel. The name itself, I guess, kind of was trying to draw in the fact that, hey, ARM can be used in greenhouse studies too. It doesn't have to only be for field trials. But yeah, I think there are, growth chamber is another one. Really any other location where you maybe have more control over the environment. I think these types of values would be what you would record. But definitely, if you have research being done in other types of environments, if there is some other thing that you would want to record about that environment, let us know. And we certainly are willing to add more fields to fit whatever research is being done within ARM. And the other question about coordinates, I'll just back up real briefly. That was related here. So for every country across the globe, we have a list of real rough boundary coordinates, for kind of each corner, real roughly speaking, again, of where the country is GPS wise. And so ARM has that knowledge to know that if you have a coordinate outside that rough box of that country, it would appear that your coordinates might be not right. So that's what ARM is checking here. So even for Spain, really for any country that your trial is in, ARM can check. And if the coordinates entered in the trial are outside of the bounds of that rough rectangle of coordinates for that country, or for your state, even a smaller level, then it can bring this as a warning to bring that to your attention. Hey, double check your coordinates because it would appear that they're outside the boundary. In my case, I forgot the negative sign, so that wasn't even right. And I think I changed my state specifically just to make it wrong in my screenshot. All right, so that was the greenhouse one. Another new tab that you'll find in the site description is called equipment. And we really modeled this off of the application equipment section. And this tab is designed really for your assessment equipment. So the goal is, you may have quite a few details about a particular piece of equipment used in the trial and used for an assessment. And so you can fill all that information in, and then the very first row, this equipment name, is a way to save all those details to a personal list, your favorites list. So that way you only really have to fill all those details in once, then it becomes this piece of equipment that you can load in again and again for all your different trials where you use that equipment. So you have that favorites list, so you're not hand entering all that information into every single one of your trials. Now, my example, I used a drone. A lot of the requests came from drones, where you want to document the drone model and details about the drone that's flying. You also want to document the sensor that is on the drone. You might need to document the software and how what was taken is analyzed. But certainly, I think we tried to make this general enough that a lot of other types of equipment that you use can still be documented here. So they're just like in every other section of ARM, there might be a lot of rows you don't need to fill in for a particular piece of equipment, but fill in ones that apply. Then, once you have described that piece of equipment in a given trial, you can link to that equipment in the assessment itself. So in the assessment header, then we kind of upgraded that equipment row to now have the ability to link. So now I can just say, I'm referring to equipment number 1 that's in this trial for this particular NDVI assessment. And so the header stays simple. We don't add a bunch more rows to the header, but it's linking and referencing all of that information about that piece of equipment. And especially helpful if I use that equipment in several different assessments. All right, real quick, we also added the ability to attach more than one GEP accreditation certificate to a trial. The motivation behind that is if your certificate expires in the middle of a trial, then you need to obtain a new certificate, and that trial, in essence, had 2 different certificates associated with it, before the expiration and after. So we have the ability now to update and add a second one if you need. There is still an X if you want to delete an old one off. Any grape research, any viticulture, we added the EL growth stages. So you can describe your crop stage using the EL stages. We added a field in the application description just to kind of encapsulate method, timing, placement, kind of a shortcut for those 3, just to have the standard code, if you will. In the objectives and conclusions, we added a couple fields. Materials and methods is just a copy of the protocol instructions, but is editable, so the trialist can go and change and match what actually occurred during the study. And then the results is just technically different from conclusions, in that you're just describing the results of the trial, whereas then conclusions is where you may draw conclusions from those results. We added new fields to the application description for a variety of different purposes. Same thing for the application equipment, kind of came from the drone applications, but may have other uses. And kind of last but not least here, pest establishment intervals, just calculating the interval from either an application or an assessment relative to when your pest is established. So if your pest was, artificially established, you put in the establishment date for that pest. Now ARM can calculate, much like some of the other intervals it does, how many days after the application, how many days after the establishment did this application occur, and how many days after the assessment did that establishment occur. Okay, so we're kind of at the end of the time here. The last slide or two were very small changes. So we'll end it there. Thank you all for joining today. If you do have questions, I kind of had to cut you short. Feel free to reach out to us. But hopefully we'll be seeing you again soon at another webinar. So thanks everyone.